And just today on Drudge, you can download the Fox report yourself, that at what the UN is up to.
Next question over here.
Yeah, Vic Parrish, and I'm just your basic fundamental chemical petroleum engineer. And the question is directed to Dr. Long. Right now, I think 380 parts per million, I think that's the number you see for CO2 concentration. That's 380 atoms, molecules, carbon dioxide that's in the environment, going to 450, 470, or 500. As a chemical engineer, I know that the only reason that we know there are 380 parts per million or 380 atoms in a million atoms, molecules in the atmosphere is because we measure it. Could you describe to me the physical or chemical characteristics that allows one CO2 molecule that doesn't even know that there's another CO2 molecule in the environment, what it is that allows it to have such an influence on the environmental temperatures?
Well, it's the interaction between the properties of the molecule and radiation, okay? It's basically what we call in the business radiative transfer. So that Mr. Fox's point that CO2 is such a small part of the atmosphere is only a very small part of the story. For example, I mean, if he claims that man's the percentage amount of CO2 in the atmosphere is a very small percent, 3% or something like that, I believe he referred to. Well, imagine how much smaller a percent is ozone. I mean, ozone's got to be what? Maybe 1/10 or 1/100th of 1%. So, according to that very same reasoning, ozone should, whether we have any ozone in the atmosphere, should not matter whatsoever. It's such a small part of the atmosphere. Yet, can you imagine what we would be literally festering lumps of cancer without the little bit of ozone we have in the atmosphere? So you can't just talk about the concentration or how much of a gas is in there. You have to take into account its physical properties. Most of the atmospheric gases don't react, they're inert, which is a good thing. So you have to really, how can it affect it so much? It's because of its physical properties with respect to infrared radiation. That's exactly what the greenhouse effect is.
Mike?
Well, I don't think Vic's question was answered. That 97% of the natural of CO2 in the atmosphere is natural. And that's a measurable fact. As far as gases being able to absorb energy in various wavelengths, that happens to be one of the things that I was pounded on in my graduate school, is how do vapor phase molecules absorb energy? And there's 4 ways that it does that, through translation, vibration, rotation, and electronic. And all of these various modes of absorbing energy depends upon the energy we're talking about. And the energy we're talking about is down in the infrared, which is rotational. And in the rotation, in the low energy infrared, I'm sorry guys. Carbon dioxide is a linear molecule. Oxygen, carbon, and oxygen again. And it has very few rotational modes that are independent. So its absorption spectrum is very limited. Whereas water, it's a very complicated molecule, even though it's a triatomic atom molecule. It has a greater number of modes for absorption. And I don't have what the absorption spectrum is for ozone, but it's going to be more complicated than CO2. But there's a lot of smoke and mirrors here, and I would dearly love to invite Dr. Long to come back and talk to the experts next year and make his presentation in front of people who can ask the hard questions and who know the literature.
We're going to observe 2 minutes here while the rest of us catch up with the engineers in the room. Let me give our next questioner, Skip.
This question is directed to Dr. Fox. The because I'm a small business person, very interested in business and its survival in this country, and interested in the economy and its survival in this country, I'm just curious about cap and trade and putting a limit on so-called man-made CO2, and wondering what this is based on and how relevant, how accurate is historical data of CO2.
As it's turning out, the scientific basis underpinning all of this is unbelievably thin, and much of it is unreplicated. I can, for example, the hockey stick, which everybody should know about, but probably doesn't. It was a portrayal of the last 1,000 years of global temperatures. And it was assembled by a team of people out of the University of Maryland, and they produced a chart. I would have shown it to you if I had more time, of the last 1,000 years of temperature, and it's quite linear from 1000 AD to about 1900, where it took a sharp spike upward. This has been featured 1,000,000 times in Gore's movie, which in turn has been featured 1,000,000 times in our educational system. And it's turned out that that hockey stick is fraud, scientific fraud. And the reason I can say that is because people have been through their laundry of these people, of the authors, and have shown, first of all, they misused bristlecone pine data, they misused the polar Aral mountain area in northern Siberia. They misused that. And now people are going through and trying to replicate that data, and they're not replicating anything that shows like a hockey stick. Secondly, and this is the crowning jewel, is that the algorithm, the computer algorithm, which, oh good, 10 seconds, beautiful close. 30. Oh, 30. The computer algorithm used by those authors it required the Canadian scientists to assemble code word by code word the algorithm that these guys in the University of Maryland would not share. Even though it's federal money, they wouldn't share it. So they replicated that computer code and determined that that computer code could produce a hockey stick shaped curve from a table of random numbers. Did you get that? Sorry.
Chuck?
Well, geez, I don't know what to say, because there have been, and I have a slide that I brought, but I could show you, but in the atmospheric science literature, Dr. Fox is referring to the man temperature reconstruction. I also have 9 other temperature reconstructions that have been published, that have been done not using information from trees, but information from other sources like glacial or ice core samples, ocean sediments, lots of other things. And the idea that the hockey stick graph per se has been totally debunked is just plain false. Whether you include the Little Ice Age or not, which is another sticking point, every single one of them, the places that they disagree is in the time, 10,000 years ago, the older time where you have to reconstruct the temperature. If you really look at this, every single one of them totally agrees in the very rapid temperature increase in the last 100 years. So you can quibble and you can argue about methodology, whether you used a computer program, what your source of information was. You can do all that for 1,000 years ago. But it is just indisputable that the last 100 years, all the temperature reconstructions agree. And that's what we're really talking about now. Man's industrial civilization wasn't around 10,000 years ago. It's an entirely new factor in the climate. You cannot use past climate history to predict where we're going to go from here, because there's a whole new factor that the past climate record just does not include.
Next question.